Thank you, Chairman. And I was elated to hear that our subcommittee, the Subcommittee on Economic and Consumer Policy, was actually holding a hearing on inflation. Thank you. You know, today is September the 22nd, meaning that after nearly 9 full months, this is only the second hearing that we've had this calendar year. So I'm very glad that Democrats are actually holding a hearing on a relevant topic. Let's not forget that the only other hearing that this subcommittee has had was on pet, flea, and tick collars. This year, the United States has experienced the highest inflation in decades, and it is deeply troubling to me that Democrats on this committee seem to have decided to turn a blind eye to the painful price hikes their policies have inflicted on the American people. Now, Democrats are desperately trying to deflect the blame, largely toward capitalism and so-called corporate greed, rather than admitting that their runaway spending and big government socialist agenda has caused and continues to fuel the inflation crisis. Last week, the CPI report revealed that during the month of August, inflation hit a whopping 8.3%, exceeding all expectations. The average price of gas is still 25% higher than last year, and groceries have surged almost 14%. Groceries. The price of groceries continues to rise, hitting the lowest income Americans the hardest. Eggs are up nearly 40% compared to August of 2021. Milk is up 17%. Chicken is up 17%, and bread is up over 16%. Now Americans are struggling to buy groceries and to afford gas, and it simply did not have to be like this. Mr. Wright, I believe you served in the Clinton administration, is that correct?
That's correct, Congressman.
All right. I believe Mr. Larry Summers, who served as the 71st United States Treasury Secretary, also served in the Clinton administration. Is that correct?
Yes, I was there. We overlapped at the same time.
Okay, great. Do you think he is a qualified and knowledgeable individual?
I do. He's a friend, and I respect him.
Thank you. Well, Harvard professor Mr. Larry Summers was a top economic advisor to both President Clinton and President Obama, and I think that's pretty impressive. And yet the Biden administration seems to have refused to heed economists' warnings of growing inflation. On February the 4th, 2021, Professor Summers, who again served in both the Clinton and the Obama administrations, warned that President Biden's almost $2 trillion, quote, stimulus plan, known as the American Rescue Plan, was 3 times as large as the output shortfall, and that, quote, policymakers need to ensure that they have plans in place to address the possible and quite serious problem of inflation. And I want to point out that I voted against this disastrous piece of Democrat legislation last year. Yet again, on May the 18th of this year, Mr. Summers reiterated his concern, but the concern apparently again fell on deaf ears. He said that Democrat policymakers are, and I quote, taking very substantial risks on the inflation side. Given that even top Democrat economic advisors, economists, like Mr. Summers, warned of this inflation because of the left policies, it seems hypocritical that now Democrats are blaming companies for rising prices. Dr. Mabud, I would like to ask you a pretty simple question. A yes or no will suffice. Are the Biden administration and congressional Democrats to blame at all for the crippling inflation burdening hardworking American families?
The critical investments the administration and Congress made over the course of the pandemic is the reason that we're in the middle of a job-full recovery rather than a jobless recovery.
I didn't ask you about that. I asked you about inflation. Would you please answer the question?
It's really important to address the fact that working people are the people who keep this economy going.
Okay, so you're not going to answer the question. You are not going to answer whether or not Democrats in the Biden administration are to blame at all for crippling inflation burdening hardworking families.
You know, I'm here today to talk about corporate profiteering, which has been hiking prices.
Okay, all right, so we're not going to get anywhere here. Over the weekend, President Biden stated in a 60 Minutes interview that inflation had hardly risen, quote, the inflation rate month to month was just an inch, hardly at all. So, Mr. Goodspeed, is inflation just up an inch, hardly at all?
No, you can look at the year-over-year figure, which is 8.3% headline. You can look at the core or underlying measures of inflation, median inflation, to which everyone was pointing a year ago, saying this is evidence that we don't have an inflation problem. In August, that rose at an annualized rate of 9.2%.
So we have a problem with inflation.